Hi, and welcome back again. In this video, we'll be looking at future passive verbs that are really very similar to aorist passive verbs. There are no tricks here. The future passive indicates, of course, future time, and passive voice, in other words, that the subject of the verb undergoes or suffers the action. So in English, we express this kind of thing with will be plus the past participle ending in ed or en. I will be something ed. They will be something n. So here are some English examples. I will be surprised if it rains on Saturday. I'm the one who's being surprised, but I'm also the subject of the verb, so it's passive. But we've put it in the future time. I will be surprised. She will be driven to the theater by her date. They will be taken to jail after the trial. There are two ways of forming the future passive in Greek, just like the aorist passive. First, in the verb stem, the first future passive doesn't have any stem change. And the second future passive does use the aorist passive stem. So presumably this is going to involve some stem change. One thing to notice, though, is in the future passive, unlike the aorist passive, we have no augment. Why? Because there's no indication of past time here. We're dealing with future time. The other thing we do is add a sigma to the aorist passive tense marker. So if it's a first future passive, just like the first aorist passive was theta, eta, now we're going to add a sigma onto that and make it thais. And in the second future passive, we just had the a tense marker with no theta, and so we add a sigma onto that and make it ace. And remember, adding a sigma on before the ending was what we did to indicate future time in the regular future active verbs. The endings, then, are just like the present, middle, or passive. In other words, these use primary endings, but the primary middle passive endings. The connecting vowel, like in the present tense, will be either omicron or epsilon, and the primary middle passive endings are my, psi, tai, etc. So how do I know which future passive to use? When I look at a particular verb, should I use the first future passive or the second future passive? Well, the answer is based on what form of aorist passive the same verb uses. If a verb is a first aorist passive, it will be a first future passive as well. If a verb is a second aorist passive, it will be a second future passive as well. Here are the parts of a first future passive verb then. We have the stem, graph, the tense marker, which now has a sigma added onto it, thais, the connecting vowel, which might be omicron or epsilon, and then the primary passive, middle passive ending like my or tai. And the complete form will be something like, for grapho, graphthaesomai or graphthaesatai. Here are some first future passive examples. With the verb luo, the first person singular would be luthaesomai. The second person singular would be luthaesae. And notice that you get the same collapsing of the epsilon connecting vowel with the psi ending that you do in the middle of the second person singular middle in present tense verbs. The third person singular is luthaesatai. The first person plural, luthaesomatha, then luthaesesta, and finally luthaesontai. That's what the forms will look like without all of that highlighting. Future passive verbs will never have an augment. augment. This is key to remember, and one of the keys to distinguishing between the first aorist passive and the first future passive. So we will have blef thesomai, but the aorist passive would be eblef thane. Just remember that the augment can hide. It can hide in a lengthened first vowel, like agapethein, the aorist passive from agapao, and the long eta at the beginning there is lengthened from the alpha because of the augment. So the future passive will be agapethesomai. Or the augment, remember, can come after a prepositional prefix. So the future passive is apoluthesomai, from apolumi, but the aorist passive is apeluthane. That epsilon is the augment, and it knocked off the last vowel of the prepositional prefix. The other thing is that an aorist passive verb will almost never have the thes combination. It often has the the, but rarely has thes, which is typical of the future passive. Just be careful of the third person plural, because there we do have theson in the aorist passive. But in all of the other situations, thes will be indicative of a future passive. Here are the parts of a second future passive verb. The stem, and here we're working with apostello, and so the stem is the same as the second aorist passive stem, apostal. The tense marker now is ace instead of thes. We've dropped the theta because we're in the second future passive. We use the same connecting vowel, omicron or epsilon, and the same primary middle passive endings, my, psi, tai, etc. So the first person singular would be apostolesomai, and the third person singular would be apostolesatae. And notice again there's no augment, and so it's apostal instead of apestal. Here are all the forms of that verb in the second future passive. First person singular is, as we've seen, apostolesomai. Second person, apostolese, again with the eta and iota subscript from that collapsed second person singular ending. The third person singular, apostolesatae, and in the plural we have apostolesomatha, apostolesestha, and apostolesontai. And that's what the forms look like without the highlighting. And although the highlighting is helpful for us to see the pieces, it's important for you to learn to pick out those pieces yourself when you just have the verb without all of the highlighting done for you. Is a verb second aorist passive or second future passive? Again, the same features we'll look for. In the future passive, we'll never have an augment. And again, remember that the augment can hide either by lengthening an initial vowel or by coming after a prepositional prefix. The second aorist passive almost never has the ace combination, eta sigma. And again, just watch the third person plural. Just like in the first aorist, thes was unusual, except in the third person plural, which was theson. So in the second aorist passive, we have in the third person plural ason. But aside from that, the ace combination is going to be typical of the second future. You can learn more about future passive verbs in Mounce's Basics of Biblical Greek, and once more, I've given you the section and page numbers there.